Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Sister Mu'mina, we are very happy to be talking to you today. And just to kind of get everything started, this is going to be an oral history interview with Sister Mu'mina Ali in the historic West End community in Atlanta, Georgia. Today is July 28, 2013, and it's also the month of Ramadan. And my co-interviewer is...
Sosin Muhammad. How are you, Sister Mu'mina?
I'm doing well, alhamdulillah.
And for the record, I'm Zainab Ansari, and we're going to go ahead, inshallah, God willing, and just jump right into our questions for Sister Mu'mina. And really, our first question is we'd like to hear about your story of becoming Muslim and also how you came to Atlanta.
I became Muslim. I took my Shahada in 1979. I was raised in a family who were God-fearing, but they weren't religious. But I spent a lot of my time with my grandmother, who was a devout Christian. And as a matter of fact, my mother used to say, you know, I spent more time with her than I did with my mom. But she was very devout. She was very God-conscious. She was very prayerful. And I became conscious at a very young age of Allah and that Allah was real. And I went to church with her and Sunday school and everything. And even from a young age, I didn't believe in what they were saying. It didn't make sense. I said I was, 7 years old, and I knew that 3 didn't equal 1. There's 3, the Trinity, and it's 1. No, 3 is not equal to 1. And I used to ask a lot of questions, and my Sunday school teacher really was perturbed by me, and she told me I'd understand everything when I got older. And I realized that this was not the way, that there was God, and he was over everything, but this was not the way. But I also realized that I was a small child, and I could not go out on my own and find the real way to worship Allah. And so I made a covenant with Allah when I was young. I said, I'm going to keep coming to church because these are the only people I know who are talking about you. But when I get to be an adult, you're going to show me the right way to worship you. And I met my husband in college, and he had come from a similar background and search for the way to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he was a year ahead of me, so he graduated from college and I was in my senior year, and he just happened to run into a Muslim, and the Muslim started giving him dawah. And so he calls me, and up at college he said, listen, I ran into this Muslim, and this is what he told me. And then the Muslim gave him literature which he sent to me, and we spent hours on the phone just going through the literature, and we was like, this is it, this is it, this is it. Allah has sent this to us. And once I graduated, I took my Shahada. I took my Shahada the next year, as a matter of fact. And the reason there was a time lapse between me graduating and me taking my Shahada is because I wanted to make sure I was doing it fi sabilillah. Because by the time I graduated, my fiance had taken his Shahada. And I said, you know what? I don't want this to have anything to do with you, that I'm taking my Shahada because you're Muslim. I have to be able to worship Allah on my own. This is my relationship with God, and it has nothing to do with you. And as long as I think you have any influence on this, I'm not going to do it. And so after about a year, he moved to Atlanta. So I said, okay, he's gone. I'm never going to see him again. So now it's me and Allah. And I started going to the Islamic Center and started taking classes. And it was wonderful. At that time, they had a class it was a beginner's class, but it was a class for people who were new shahadas, people who had family members who were Muslim and wanted to learn more about the religion, or people who were just investigating the religion on their own. So it wasn't intimidating at all. So I started going there to learn about Islam, and the more I learned about Islam, the more I knew in my heart that this is the way, and I took my Shahada. And I learned my fundamental classes there.
What year was this?
That was in 1979. That was in 1979.
1979. And can you tell us about the community and the neighborhood? What city was this?
I lived in Philadelphia at this time, and Philadelphia has always, had lots of Muslims and lots of masajids. It has just been a place where Islam has flourished. And it was funny because the masjid that my husband took his Shahada in was in West Philadelphia. And I called them the, like the militant Muslims, and I wasn't as comfortable there. Whereas I took my Shahada, it was called the Islamic Center. It was on Broad Street. It was in downtown Philadelphia. And they just had a mix of people, of immigrants, college. It was near Temple University. So they had all people from all over who came there. Professional people and people who I was more comfortable with, and so I took my Shahada there. But there were many. Even at that time, there were quite a few masjids in Philadelphia, and even now when I go back to visit Philly, Philly is like Muslim city. Every street you see Muslims, you see Muslim restaurants, you see masajids, you see in the supermarket. On my Facebook page, my background picture is the halal section of the supermarket. You go into the supermarket, like a Kroger's, they have a halal section of meat. When you go to the deli section, they have a cutter that says halal meat only. There's a section where you can buy hijabs and kufis and Islamic art in the supermarket because there's so many Muslims in Philadelphia now. So it's like you go there and you go like, I'm in Muslim city, But that's where I took my Shahada. And a lot of people always ask, do you know sister so-and-so or brother so-and-so? And I'm like, well, no, because right after I took my Shahada, I moved to Atlanta. So I only met a few Muslims there that I connected with, that I still have relationships with.
To backtrack, growing up in Philadelphia, because you're talking about Philadelphia when you embraced Islam in the late 1970s and how there was an active Muslim presence. But growing up, so as a child, did you encounter Muslims, African American Muslims, members of the Nation of Islam, for example? Were there immigrant Muslims? Or was Islam,
when I grew up in Philadelphia, I grew up in the outskirts of Philly. It wasn't the suburbs, but right where my neighborhood was the city line. And the area that I grew up in was a Jewish neighborhood. It's really strange. My first 10 years of my life, I lived in a predominantly African American neighborhood, and then my parents moved, and we moved into a predominantly Jewish neighborhood, and which very quickly became a predominantly African American neighborhood as the Jewish people moved en masse out of the neighborhood. We were the second African American family to move into that neighborhood, and I was in 5th grade. By the time I was out of middle school, it was predominantly African American. So in 4 years, thousands of people moved. Okay, but so I wasn't in the city, and so I wasn't in the city. So I was sort of, in a protected little environment. But my cousin was part of the nation. My cousin became part of the nation, and she used to come through, and I loved the change that came over her as part of the nation, because she struggled a lot with different issues, and I loved it. I loved the clothing, I loved the scars, I loved the the white and white and white, and so she told me a lot about the nation, and I admired a lot of what they did. And when I was in middle school, I actually read the autobiography of Malcolm X. I just happened to just pick it off a bookshelf and read it, and I was like totally fascinated by it. But I just did not, because I also knew of some negative things that were going on within the nation, and through my cousin's husband, who had a totally different job in the nation, I'm like, no, this is God, and this is how you're mixing two different things. You're doing all these positive things, but then there's all these negative things. So I said, no, that's not for me. But I saw such positiveness in it. I was like, it was really great, but I just knew, no, that's not my way either.
And when you became Muslim, you said it was during college, and which school did you go to, and what was the Muslim presence like on campus?
When I became Muslim, it was the year after I graduated from college, but when I went to Shippensburg, it's now called Shippensburg State University, but it was Shippensburg State College in the middle of Pennsylvania, in the mountains of Pennsylvania. It was is a predominantly white university, and it was funny because they were trying to, get African Americans to come, and every year there would be like 100 students, and by the end of the year there'd be 100 students because so many people would leave or flunk out, and so I really don't remember any Muslims there. I'm sure they were, But I don't remember, my first really interaction with Muslims was after I graduated, and I was in Philly and I was searching for a way to worship Allah.